Doing well.
Good, good.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
That's good to see you.
It's weird being in this virtual space. I was like sitting there waiting for you to start the meeting, and I
Uh-huh.
was thinking like if we were meeting in person, I would see you coming and there would be like this sort of transition from you not being there to being there. And I don't know, I think they need to figure out a way to do that in virtual space. You sort of
Yeah,
like fade in and fade out or something like
yeah.
that.
Well, why don't we begin? Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go from
Um Yeah, I think that would be a good place to start, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of branching off points that are of interest to you.
there. Okay.
So we'll sort of explore, hopefully.
All right.
So where to start? Um, so I grew up here in Santa Cruz.
Okay.
I am one of seven children. I come from a large homeschool, Christian
Wow.
conservative homeschool family.
Okay.
And so if you think about like sort of the stereotype in your mind when you hear that, that's sort of been my family. Less so now. We've sort of, I guess, uh, is more of the. So I'm the sixth out of seven. So we're
Okay.
all adults now,
Okay.
and over time we've been, as more people mature and go out in the world, there's definitely less of the sheltered sort of conservative homeschool vibe.
Yeah.
Um, but that's still, that's sort of where I come from. Um, and I would say another. So we grew up Protestant,
Okay.
and and I would say sort of unconventionally so. One of the unique things about our family, I think, is um, my parents have, for as long as I can remember, my parents have sort of questioned, I guess, the church as an institution, and then a lot of the sort of a lot of the big theological questions, the afterlife, heaven and hell. My dad in particular, and then from as a result of some negative experiences with politics in the church, they sort of became quite disillusioned with the church as an institution, and the church, being a Protestant, that's sort of in quotes,
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Which church?
right,
There's so
um,
many of them, which you don't say if you're Orthodox or Roman Catholic.
right. Um, so so that we stopped going to church as a family when I was about 6 or 7 years old.
Huh.
Still, my parents are self-identified Christians to this day. They believe Jesus rose from the dead and all of that.
Was
Um,
there home church or house church or anything like that in place of?
yeah, we tried a lot of that, and yeah, so they definitely tried home church on a number of different occasions. It was always, I think, I would have to talk to them, but I think the what always caused that to fall apart was, um, it's division, issues between individual broken humans, and um, I think I think a big part of my parents' struggle throughout their adult lives has been looking for the kind of community that will bring about healing for them and for everyone involved, because they have, you know they're broken people. I mean, they had broken parents, and a sort of, inherited a very skewed view of God. I think, especially my dad, that he was raised Southern Baptist, and um, was terrified of God growing up, terrified that he was gonna, of this angry man in the sky who was gonna, lash out at the slightest provocation, because, well, that's what his earthly father was like. And anyway, so that's, this gets passed down through the generations. It
Sure.
impacts my life. So let's see, where do I go from there?
You
Yeah, I think
obviously
I
stopped homeschooling at some point, or did you homeschool all the way K through
homeschooled
12?
all the way K through 12. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then college or no college?
Yeah. So I went to UC Davis, actually.
Okay.
I transferred there from community college. I
Okay.
got my degree in mechanical engineering.
Okay.
And so I have it. So I had a scientific engineering background education, and I think that was a big part in that. Definitely played a role, especially like I had some really good teachers in community college for physics, and very, very influential, two in particular, that I think that was sort of the learning physics from really good teachers. I think who the teacher is really matters in those contexts. And that really opened me up initially, sort of intellectually. And from there, I think, having inherited my dad's wrestling with these theological questions, with God and all of that. Akira the Don, you know who Akira the Don is?
Yeah.
He asked on Twitter one time, what's your what was the number one thing you learned from your dad? And I was like, oh, that's a good question. I have to think about that. And then I was like, oh, I know what it is. My dad taught me to wrestle with God. And it wasn't ever anything explicit that he said. It was just that's who he was, and that's the example that he set. So I began wrestling with some of the theological questions that often come up. How can a loving God send people to hell? And my parents had been, I mentioned, they'd been wrestling sort of with the whole idea of the afterlife, which is, the Old Testament doesn't even mention the afterlife, arguably, and the New Testament really, our ideas of heaven and hell are sort of, they're not very explicit there in the New Testament. And I started watching clips here and there of N.T. Wright. He's talking about how it's really like there's Bible talks about a bodily resurrection in the age to come, and that's not really what the when you think of what Christians believe, what happens when you die. We seem to be confused on that. So questions like that, I began wrestling with, and there came a point where it was like, I had started going to church. Me and my siblings started going to church again when I was about like a teenager, became a teenager, let's say 13 or 14. And I actually wanted to ask you, are you familiar with Twin Lakes Church? Any of the here in Santa Cruz? Okay. No. I just thought you might be, because that was the church we started going to. But I would say I didn't find the sense of belonging that every human is looking for. And that's something been struggling with my whole life. It's the same struggle my parents has. Like where where's that sense of community? And I think asking all of these questions about theology and just in my own sense of not really experiencing any sort of real relationship to God, and then not being integrated in a community. It sort of got to this point where I was like, why do I believe any of this? Like, what's holding me here? There was like a Monday morning, I woke up and I was like, something's gonna go down this week. Like, I don't, like, it wasn't an explicit thought, but it was like it feels like something's gonna break, like something big is gonna happen. And like, sure enough, by that Friday morning, I was in my electric circuits lab, and usually I would stay like Friday afternoon to work on homework and at school and free up time for the weekend. And I just like couldn't do, like, as soon as my lab was over, I just went straight to my car and I drove home, and I drove into my driveway, and then it was like boom, and like I didn't believe any of it anymore. And that was like that moment was very terrifying for me. It's like, my whole world up to that point had been rooted in the Christian belief system that I had been raised in. All of my relationships in my life were, for the most part, that was a big part of it. And so there's just this terrifying sense of like everything I've been standing on just is crumbling beneath me. And I FaceTime my brother, who's away at my younger brother, who was away at school up in Seattle. And, I was just in tears, like, what's happening to me?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out he had been going through something similar and just didn't feel like he was in a place comfortably to share it.
Yeah.
So I was unaware of that.
Yeah.
And so I have 2 brothers and 4 sisters, and all 3 of us boys have gone through a similar sort of deconstructive process at this point. And, my older brother went through that before me. So it was less of a shock when I was sort of, expressing this to my parents, that it was something that they had already experienced. But that initial moment was like, I had never experienced that sort of a profound disillusion of everything I thought I knew. The whole propositional framework. And I still had the notion of like God at that point, but just like, I don't know, like the Jesus rising from the dead was, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Why do I believe this anymore?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in the following weeks after that, though, it was like I would say those were, up to that point in my life, some of the most free, like the freest weeks of my life. There was just, it was like I had been born again, but like rather than being converted, I had been deconverted. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense to any of the stories I've been told my whole life. It's like I've been waiting for this experience, like this sort of revelation of something beyond what I've been used to, the little box that I've been stuck in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always looking for that as like, because I'd hear stories of Christians who went through this profound, whether it's a conversion experience or some sort of revelation experience. And that it felt sort of like that happened to me. It's like I experienced that opening between the self and the world that John Vervaeke talks about, that reciprocal opening, as a result of like breaking free of that what was in many ways a sort of a cage for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but and it was a useful, I would say, generative scaffold insofar that it gave me uh, a thing to grow in.
Mhm.
But like
Mhm.
at some point, it's like I had to break free of that.
Mhm.
Um, so then from there got into um, Sam Harris, or the new atheist crowd, um, and it, um, I was sort of wrapped up in that until Jordan Peterson came on the scene. And so, you've talked to many young men who have similar stories, but yeah, I have basically the same story of, um, I started well, I first heard Jordan Peterson on Sam Harris's podcast when they did those first two conversations, and I was like, this guy. The first one, I was like, this guy is crazy with his pragmatic notion of truth. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Um, and then like and then little by little, it's like, okay, this is interesting though. Like, I got to think about this.
Yeah.
And I started listening to his biblical series, and that was like, let's see, when was that? That was January of 2018, I think, when I started listening to those. And it was just like, how he is, how he speaks, and it's all over the place, and you're like, where is this guy going? And then somehow it's like he brings it all together. And for the first 2 or 3 episodes, it was like, where is this going? Like, this is just like, something wasn't clicking for me, and then suddenly it like clicked, and it was like this, I don't know, I started just being able to see things in a different way as a result of having sort of internalized Jordan Peterson's way of perceiving the world, and talking about the world and all of that. Um, and so then, little by little, Christianity started to take on this new light for me, and I was like, oh, I can see it through like this, as this sort of mythological structure, that's sort of at the bottom of our civilization. And there's a very profound story there that like speaks to the perennial patterns of humanity. And so and then Peterson as a person, I think, in many ways was that father figure that I
Mhm.
had been longing for.
Mhm.
um and so that's I don't deny that that's a big part of what drew me to him.
Mhm. Mhm.
um there was like this sense of a call to uh to make something of my life and to take it seriously, and it was like this big sobering time of my life. And it's interesting, I recently read Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov,
Mhm.
and it was a similar effect. It's like a totally different,
Mhm.
it's a novel, it's a work of literature, but it was like that same sobering effect.
Mhm.
And for me, it makes sense. Like, Peterson's been very heavily influenced by Dostoevsky. There's like a similar spirit I get from both of them.
Mhm.
It's like I don't know quite how to describe it, but it's just like this very, there's like these piercing eyes, and it's just like very sobering to look into those eyes.
Mhm.
That's just sort of like the metaphor that comes to mind.
Mhm.
um so from Peterson, I would say that took me into John. I stumbled across John Vervaeke's
Mhm.
work. I went through his whole Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Yeah.
And that was, I've been thinking sort of wrestling with the church, again in quotes there.
Yeah.
I guess because it's so such a it's been such a part of my parents' struggle, is trying to find that, where's the body of Christ? Like, what is that supposed to look like? What is that supposed to be? I think I've been sort of at a distance, wrapped up in their struggle, but also for my own, like it's my own struggle as well. And so I've been looking at sort of the problems I have with the church as I've experienced it within Protestantism, and realizing a lot through John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis that what I was attributing to Christianity or Protestantism is actually just one instance of a bigger cultural meaning crisis. So I don't think it's fair to put the blame on Christianity or on Protestantism or in any one denomination. I think it's all interconnected in this meaning crisis. And that was sort of one of the big revelations I had, was like, oh, everyone, like this isn't just Christianity, that, like we're all trying to find that like, what does true community look like? What is that supposed to be? And then the other thing I would say from John Vervaeke is, like, he helped integrate sort of my more academic pursuits in engineering, and then I, via Peterson, got very interested in psychology and philosophy, and then Vervaeke comes along with cognitive science, and I have this interest in artificial intelligence and artificial life, and so he's sort of, Vervaeke's integrated a lot of things for me in very, like, profound ways. And then his Dialogos project, which is just sitting down and having conversations with people. It's so cool. Like, I've thought about how he talks about in this idea of internalizing the sage, and I think, okay, what, like, who is the sage? What is the sage? Because we seem to have, like, a notion of, like, the sage is like this, archetypal wise man, maybe. And I've been noticing, like, I sort of piece together who that person is through the men I encounter in my life in particular. And I'm noticing, like who are the men that I look up to? And it's like, oh, it's Jordan Peterson, it's John Vervaeke, it's these people, that Jordan Hall, Paul Vanderklay, Jonathan Pajot, Guy Sengstock. It's all these people who are having these conversations. And the really cool thing about that, I've noticed, is that it's not just I'm seeing these individuals isolated from one another and internalizing them as sort of like separate entities. It's like they're talking to each other, and like you're talking to all of these people in these different combinations. And then that does something to, in the way I've internalized all of these different people. It's, I get to experience that dialogue take place within myself. And I just think that's so cool. So it's like been this profound journey just to be a passive observer up till just recently. Um, and now it's like, okay, I want to start taking the courageous steps of actually being a participant in some of these dialogues. So hence my time reaching out to you and
Here we
talking.
are.
Yeah.
Well, that's helpful. That's really helpful. Shoot, you're in Santa Cruz. So is so are a few others. That's been interesting. How, because part of what, and I think this is also part of Vervaeke's vision, but I haven't heard it, I haven't seen him do as much of the organizing as, let's say, we've done with Bridges of Meaning and the meetups. There's a it's a weird thing, because on one hand, Peugeot, when Peugeot said, well, when you look at people on YouTube, you're watching beings of light. And when Peugeot said that, a light went on for me. It's like, oh yeah, well, there's this weird trick that we do, like what you noticed when, boop, here I am in a Zoom room, and you and I are here in a Zoom room, and we're talking over this machine, and there's enough here that it sort of gives us the sense that we're speaking face to face, but there are gaps in it that we know we're not, and there's a degree of unreality that is happening here. So because it's one thing to encounter the sage and to have conversations with the beings of light. It's another, I think all of that moves us to want to basically embody the positive, the attractive, honorable, desirable qualities that we see. Rene Girard, his mimetic theory of desire, we begin to desire, part of our desire is this mimicry, this mimetic behavior. And I've been thinking about that a lot. That's deep in terms of who we are and what we do. And so that obviously is a big deal with fathers. That our fathers, and my sermon last week, our fathers are our first neighbors, our fathers and mothers, and they're our most God-like neighbors, in that they create us. And they don't just, in the case of a biological parent who is also the parent that raises us, they don't just produce us in terms of our genetic material and carry through the genetic material of their ancestors, but they also, so much of us is this this culture being. And we, I was thinking, as a pastor, you talk to people who are getting married and wrestling with their relationships in marriage, or having children and wrestling with their being as parents, and coming to terms with the fact that they inherited a first draft that their conscious self didn't sort of evaluate. It's just all built into you. And so I love, I love your story and how you related it, how this first draft that, and your parents didn't even know consciously they were bestowing that on you too. And of course, being one of 7 siblings, you also realize, because I have 5 children, that all of you have the same genetic parents, sort of had the same, the same formative parents that raised you, but you're towards at the end, and each of those first children began to re-edit your parents' parenting drafts so that by the time they got to you, you had slightly different parents than your older siblings had.
Oh yeah.
But it's also, it also occurred to me when you were telling your story how, so we homeschooled our children as well, not all the way through 12th grade. So our oldest son very much wanted to play basketball. And so that sort of led him into the school system. And then my second son was quite tall. He was tall like I am. And he followed sort of in his brother's footsteps. So not only were my wife and myself imprinting our children, but then the oldest sibling starts to imprint the children too. And you talked about that in terms of the deconstructive experience that you
Hmm.
had. So and now of course then, I also, in the sermon I preached last week, I brought up John Van Donk, who John Van Donk's father, his biological father, was not a great father, and in many ways abandoned the family. His biological father was in the Netherlands during the Second World War, a young man, and worked for the Nazis. And those are the Dutch after the war told all of these stories about how their ancestors resisted the Nazis and hid Jews, but John has the opposite story, and it's a shameful story. And so John went through his life with some resentment and about fatherhood, only later on to realize that he in fact had been fathered by many others along the way. So saying all of that to sort of come around your story as the deep impact obviously of your parents, and the people don't sufficiently realize sort of the anti-institutional element in homeschooling, because it's so often you read in the secular media all of this suspicion and alarm at homeschooling. These homeschoolers are, how dare they educate their own children. And then to listen to like Brett and Heather Weinstein, or Heather Hying and Brett Weinstein, sort of become neo-traditionalists with the family. And but so it's not surprising that the suspicion of institutions that your parents exhibited in the choice to homeschool all of you also was there in terms of the church.
Mm.
And I love what you said about noticing that, well, it isn't just church people who are looking for the perfect church. We're all looking for that community. And in a sense, every parent tries their hand at creating it with a family and fails.
Mm.
And then every friend group, because you sort of begin with the family as your friend group, and especially if you're homeschooled, I mean, that really creates tight bonds between the sibling, especially if the parents are doing a good job.
Hmm.
And you all, one of the things, it's not uncommon to hear other parents complain about how their children don't get along. My children get along quite well together. Doesn't mean they don't have, favorites or get sideways with each other, but for the most part, the experience of homeschooling taught them how to, you know, have differences and mend fences, and look to each other and trust each other in a deep way. So just last weekend, we had all of the kids together. We were visiting my son in Cayucos down the coast. And so my youngest son goes to UC Santa Cruz, and so he's living in Santa Cruz right now, and so he drove down. So no, I love your story, and there's so much I can relate to it, and now especially at your age, you've been imprinted by your parents, and that was the first draft, and so now you're trying other drafts, and so now via YouTube, you're not limited to your college professors or your local pastor, or and in a sense you can sort of look at these others and try them out, but the same, that's going to work through, because you're going to at some point probably want to pursue not only, looking at the sages and talking to the sages, but embodying the sage and embody the father, and probably find a spouse and create a family. And so every church planter I know, in their church planting, they pursue exactly what you've been talking about, because they've been involved in churches and they say, but I'd like to try my hand at doing it right. And like every parent starts a family, both hopefully experiences a degree of success and then a degree of, oh, I, you know, I tried my, I was fathered. I tried my hand at fathering, and maybe I achieved some of those things that I felt my father didn't do well, but I also found myself repeating some of the things my father didn't do well. And I found some things recognizing that my father did well that didn't arise to my conscious layer. And that's why I very intentionally use that first draft language, because when people enter into a relationship, a significant romantic, intimate relationship, suddenly, because the other person is looking back and saying, "Why did you do that?" And you say, "I don't know." So it's, at your stage in life, you're doing what you need to do in terms of, and it's so amazing that nobody sat us down and told us this. Maybe someone did, but I'm excited that Peterson's going to look at the book of Proverbs, and it makes deep sense in terms of the Peterson wave, because the book of Proverbs is all about, this is what young men need to know. And so what you're doing in terms of, watching me or Pajot or Vervaeke and Peterson, you're working through those issues and you're gathering wisdom, and you're accumulating it. And just like as this infant and toddler and grade schooler and high schooler and college, you didn't, especially in the younger years, you didn't recognize you were absorbing from your parents and filtering as you absorbed, and all of that was getting built into you. I mean, you're doing the same thing now, and it's exactly right, and it's the right time in your life to do it. And and your longings are leading you in the right direction and saying, where can I find that community that fleshes me out, and the role how can I become a part of a principality, as it were, as this, because we human beings are very strange. We're not whole until we find ourselves in, as the New Testament calls, a body. You're in the body of Christ. And
Mm,
so, I mean, even the language, Christ is the principality, and we are members. And the Apostle Paul says, we're not members like at Costco, where we're just sort of numbers, where you long to be in a body where the uniqueness that has been built into you by your story and by your genetics and by everything that you are, now suddenly finds fulfillment and place and manifestation in that larger, I mean, that's what you're longing for with community.
mhm.
And your longing is really a wonderful thing, in that, well, it's hard because it's an unfulfilled thing, but it drives you into saying, can we make this community better? can can we perfect it? Can we improve it? And you might not even know all of the components that are in this idealized community that you're longing for and looking for. If I asked you to write them down, you could give me kind of a list, but it's much more intuitive than that, because you
Right.
come up against something and say, this, not that, I think.
Yeah.
So I've rambled on long enough, but I just
No,
wanted to
thank you.
say all that because in listening to your story, you're doing the right thing. And I want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Um, yeah, there's a lot of things as you were talking that I thought I could pick up on. I think one of them is, um, noticing division within my own family, much of which has come with the fact that the three of us boys have gone through this whole deconstructive process, and everyone has their own journey, and it's that's there's I everyone has a very complex journey that they're on, and but those journeys take you in different places, and then it's like you start you start speaking a different language in some sense along the way, and then like I have a harder time speaking to members of my family because there's just a barrier that we're not using the same grammar, we don't quite have the same operating system anymore that we're operating from, and so that's been a big part of my inquiry into what is it that really matters, in because I can search and search and search and come up with all of these cool ideas, and absorb all of these cool ideas, but it's like, okay, so what's really important here? And it's this is why I think I keep realizing the importance of John's whole Dialogos project. Is like, we have to learn how to dialogue with people who might not speak the same language that we do. We have to learn how to, you know, to translate. We have to learn how to speak each other's languages. Um, and I think there's something there about speaking, like a question in my mind is like, what is the fundamental human language, and if can we all learn to speak that? And we could probably argue about what that is for forever, but I think I wanted to get into the sort of what I've been noticing is the main divide, at least for myself, between myself and some of members of my family or members of my Christian community who I care deeply for. And I think that divide is like, I've come to a place where it's like I can I can participate in the Christian story, like the passion story in particular. It's like, that's I've noticed on days where it seems like I don't know where I am, I'm lost and I'm confused, I start coming back to that story. It's like that sort of comes back online as my default, and um, there's something there, and I can participate in it. But if you were to ask me, you know, did Jesus come back to life? The historical Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah.
If I'm in, historical scientific
Yeah.
mindset, I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
no, that's
Yeah.
probably not. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's interesting is that is that that's the like, if you take that away, you're no longer a Christian. For most Christians, it's like that's what it means to be a Christian, is you believe the resurrection of
Right.
Jesus Christ actually happened in
Right.
history.
Right. Right.
And there's something about that, and I haven't quite figured this out, so it'd be interesting to explore here and see what you think of this. Is, for me, it seems like so much of the the significance of Christianity to me has been realized for me only in letting go of my grip on the historical, this literally happened.
Yeah.
And it's and what I see is that the sort of cosmic universal aspect of Christianity is lost in this emphasis on, like, the whole apologetics movement I get so frustrated with, because it's like, oh no, science is undermining, our young people are leaving the church because science. And so, well, let's use science to show that this stuff actually really did happen. And to me, that's completely missing the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
And you're missing, like, I listen to someone like Jonathan Pajot talk about Christianity, and it's just like, yes, like, you're like, there's a, it's like, it's the pattern is, you see it everywhere. Like, he talks about the pattern, and there's something that is missed when you are fixated on the history of Christianity. I'm seeing this as sort of like the dividing point, like the sticking point, where it's like, I'm not interested in persuading someone out of this or that belief. Like, I don't think that's actually what's important. But in my ability to communicate, it seems like that is often, like, the finality of this belief system having, and the historical literalism of that belief system, that seems to be like this huge sticking point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, and at the same time, I'm noticing that the sort of like mythological appreciation I have for
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, in like the huge cosmic sense of it, if it's,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of, it has the same pattern that reality, like, it's illustrating that pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I'm noticing that part of the pattern is the instantiation in history,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to reconcile these things. I don't know if that's clear.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, so
Fix it. Well, think about, let's start here. Let's start at the premise of cognitive science. I have to be quick here because we only have an hour, but start at the premise of cognitive science, that the world is so huge at any given moment. I'm sitting here in the corner of my office, and when people come to the meetup, they sometimes say, "Can I see where you do your videos?" So sure, come on in. It's this messy office that if I'm over there and I do Zoom in that computer, everybody's like, "Your office is a mess." And you make Jordan Peterson videos? Yes, I do. Life is so huge. The world is so huge. At any given moment, in order to reduce just what is in this little, how big is my office? 10 by 12, something like that. This little 10 by 12 office that I have with no see-through windows. To reduce this to math, let's say, there's not enough time in my life to reduce this whole room to math at every level that's here, because this office and the books and the material and everything that's in this little messy 10 by 12 room is near infinite in terms of reducing it, even just, let's say, to mathematical description, leaving alone being and meaning and all of that. It's just way too much. And so what we do, and this is just flat out amazing, what we do as human beings is actually find ways to manage this through just ways to management and interact with it. I mean, it's just an astounding thing that we can do. Well, how do we do it? We do it by taking certain things, and this is sort of Vervaekian relevance realization. We take certain
Mm-hmm.
things and we talk about the whole in that certain things. For example, even just that I use the word office, just floods your mind with is just like a string that's connected to this entire universe of ideas about who I am and what I do and what's in this and what this room is for. And I mean, it's just that one little word, office. It's just a miracle what that word, little word is, and that, and you and I are just in the process of this little hour-long conversation. We've managed this at a level which is just absolutely phenomenal. Okay. So let's think about an intimate relationship between two people. And let's think about a marriage, let's say. And then let's think about, I'm going to use a little word that's going to just fill up the universe, adultery. And what is adultery? Well, that's when somebody sleeps with, what do you mean sleep? It's sleeping at all. It's in fact that they're not sleeping that people have a problem. Someone sleeps with another. Okay, why do we use that word adultery? What has been adulterated by that one little act? And then as a pastor, it's not uncommon to get into conversations and people will say, well, I didn't have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky. Well, okay. Well, what happened between you and Monica Lewinsky? What happened between you? Well, it was just an emotional affair. Well, that's worse. Well, why? And so basically what I'm getting at is that everything comes down to tiny things. And so what happens, let's say, in an affair, in an adulterous affair, is that this act, this something that, and it is significant that whether they didn't or did have sex, that's important. Why is it important? And if you ponder that, you begin to recognize that the layers that unfold and the levels of the layers and all of this, there's something, and that's why we use reality in very material senses. It's when something is true at every level that it's really true, and it's really important, and it's really durable. And again, we don't know all of this very well, but part of us does. And that's why if you are in an intimate relationship with someone else and they come to you, or somehow you find out this person did that, they touched them in a certain way with certain body parts, all that meaning just explodes and transforms the world. Well, that's why the resurrection plays the role that it does in Christianity, because stuff is connected to that. And you're exactly right when you say, well, I see bunches of Christians saying, I believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. But then you look at the rest of their life and it's like, well, if you really do, it doesn't seem to matter, because when it comes to the way you're living the rest of your life, it all seems to be the same. And because when you think about, and this is equally true of deciding I can't believe it happens, that is also connected to a world of things that fans out from there. Now, we have to be really careful with this, because we should take Jordan Peterson's admonition to heart about religion, that, what you say, but you believe in, you don't believe in. Yeah, that's important, but it's not the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's way more going on than that. And you know that by virtue of the way that this tiny little incident happens. Because there are many, many people throughout history who have basically said, well, I'm sure resurrection, no problem. And it doesn't change their life. And there are other people that say, oh, definitely resurrection. It doesn't make any difference in their life. And so when you notice and listen to Jonathan Peugeot and see the mythology and the symbolism and the system and all the things that this has wrought, in a sense, you're looking at the other end of it and saying, wow. And those things are connected. And so the whole thing that we desire is this whole thing connected, because the resurrection doesn't just mean a man came back to life. We got that with Lazarus. We got that with this, Jesus is walking into town. There's a funeral procession and there's a widow and she's crying because she's lost her son. That's a really big deal in that culture because her son was her social security, her retirement, that was, and Jesus stops the procession and raises the dude and is like, bang. But the resurrection, and this is C.S. Lewis's point about the resurrection, everyone, and he wrote about this in his book Miracles, everybody focuses like on those first few minutes of the resurrection. And Lewis says that's not what energized the Christian church to do what they did. It was the fact that just like an adulterous spouse going and saying, yeah, I slept with that person. Whoosh. C.S. Lewis says that the resurrection starts to make this world that is colonized and conquered by death, that starts to change this world. And that starts to change how people act. And when you look at Christianity in all of its manifest ways and symbolism, like Peugeot is so effective at laying out, it's the word he always uses, you're looking at that end of it. And the assertion of Christianity is that just like, if, I can remember the first time I saw my wife. I can remember. I can almost describe what she was wearing. And it was like, bang, that moment started something. And now, 32 years of marriage, 5 children, some really beautiful, wonderful things, some really hard, painful things. Every marriage is full of this stuff. But it starts someplace. And that's what Christianity says about the resurrection. And so I don't, and you're right about apologetics, because whereas, and I don't want to be unkind to apologists in this or unfair to them, because many good apologists I know understand the limitations of what they do. I mean, if they can argue and say, yeah, I can convince you that the resurrection happened, that doesn't make you a Christian. And I would also say that in a weird way, there are plenty of Christians out there running around who don't believe in the resurrection on both sides of it. They say they do, or they say they don't. I mean, it's, and that's where Jordan Peterson's point has to be taken into account. And part of and I really have to land the plane here because I got somebody else now waiting for us, waiting for me. Part of what, and it's for that reason why, I encourage people to keep with to keep being honest with themselves about these kinds of things. I mean, a lot of people will, okay, I want to rush a verbal profession out of you that says, I believe Jesus walked out of that grave. I don't think that's terribly productive, because you, like me, the noisy member of our consciousness Congress is by no means the only delegate in that assembly. So I think, and I think actually most Christians I deeply value, and most of what they've been really able to offer me is because they've deconstructed and reconstructed. Because that deconstruction and reconstruction is, again, you're part of a principality, you're part of this cohort, you're part of this group, and you're working through the issues. And so the history of Christianity has been personal deconstructions and reconstructions all the way through. That's what we find with Saul to Paul. You know, he's a Pharisee.
And you could argue that that's what is exemplified in Christ. It's the dying and resurrecting individual.
Which is Jordan Peterson's big thing about the resurrection. He's saying, well, did it happen to? Almost certainly not. Sam Harris backs him into a corner. But then Jordan Peterson says, but look at what it's done for us, whether or not you believe it. That's power. And that's the power of a real thing. And a real thing that isn't just a physical thing, but a physical thing that is tied all the way out through the culture net and through all of this stuff that that we live in the midst of and care so much about. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, well, I feel like we just started. It's like we just got started on something. Yes. I hope we can do this again soon.
I hope we can.
I have a lot more to say based on what I just heard. So,
well, are you in the Discord? Bridges of Meaning Discord?
I don't think so.
Oh, you'll want to get into there.
Okay.
and I don't know if this is the kind of video you think, I mean, I can send this to you, and if you want to look at it before I share it, or if you don't want me to share it all, that's fine. I don't know what you think.
No, I'm perfectly happy with you sharing this. Yeah.
Okay. Because I mean, part of the reason I started sharing these videos is because you're not alone in working through these issues, and you shouldn't be. And that's good news, because there's lots of conversation partners out there who, you know, they've come at it from different places, and, you know, they're doing the work as you are. So that's sort of what Bridges of Meaning Discord is about. And so, yeah, I'll have to see if I do it this Friday. I do question and answer every Friday morning, 10 a.m. California time. So, and this is the kind of thing that a lot of those folks like to talk about.
Okay, great.
And if you can ever get to Sacramento for one of our local meetups, I mean, then we can talk more. That's cool too.
Yeah, I should do that sometime.
So I can send you a link to our own little Discord server for our group, and that will keep you up to speed on. Actually, we've got another meeting coming up this Sunday, 4 p.m. here at Living Stones. So if you want to make the trip, you know, you can come by then too. I'm a lot easier to get in touch with in person than on the internet. The line of people who want to talk to me on the internet is long. In Sacramento, it's a lot shorter. So, which is a good thing. So,
all right, that's good to know.
So I gotta go because the other guy's sitting in the waiting room.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. This has been wonderful. I hope to do it again soon.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Take care. Bye-bye.